Abdoulaye, a 22-year-old black man, left his native village in Africa with the hope of finding a better life in Paris. The French capital, though full of promise, turns out to be tougher than expected. Without resources, connections, or the ability to conceal his accent, he wanders the streets of Paris in search of a job. Every day, Abdoulaye faces biting cold, loneliness, and the wary glances of passers-by. Despite these challenges, he never loses his determination. His days are filled with disappointing interviews and precarious odd jobs that barely keep him afloat. Yet, he remains hopeful, steadfast in his belief in a brighter future. During his search, Abdoulaye befriends other young people like himself, who have traveled far to build a better future. Together, they share their dreams and frustrations, finding comfort in their solidarity. After months of fruitless job hunting and exhausting short-term work, Abdoulaye finally secures a position as a cleaner in a large company in the heart of Paris. The imposing glass building represents the success he dreams of achieving. Each morning, he rises before dawn and crosses the sleeping city by metro to reach his job. Though humble, the job is demanding. Abdoulaye cleans offices, hallways, and meeting rooms, often invisible to the employees who occupy these spaces during the day. Despite the discreet nature of his role, he sees it as an opportunity, a first step toward a promising future. Observant and attentive, he is convinced that one day, a chance will come his way. One day, while cleaning windows, Abdoulaye spots a remarkably elegant woman in the distance. Her attire is polished, and she carries herself with charm. He soon learns she is Mademoiselle Rebecca, the daughter of Monsieur Jean-Pierre, the company's CEO. Rebecca, though beautiful and impeccably groomed, is neither arrogant nor distant. Occasionally, she exchanges a few kind words with Abdoulaye, always with genuine warmth. From that moment, Abdoulaye cannot stop thinking about her. Her beauty and modest demeanor leave a deep impression on him. Smitten with Rebecca, Abdoulaye is acutely aware of the vast chasm between their worlds. As a young man from a modest background, he fears his feelings will never be reciprocated. The difference in status and socio-economic barriers seem insurmountable, and he convinces himself that Rebecca could only ever see him as a mere cleaner. Nonetheless, his emotions for her are intense and unyielding. Abdoulaye's colleagues, also working in less visible roles, notice his interest in Rebecca. Concerned for him, they warn him to be careful. They caution him that Monsieur Jean-Pierre is a strict man, fiercely protective of his daughter. Their warning is clear: Abdoulaye, if you value your job, don't get attached to her. The CEO doesn't tolerate issues involving his family. These warnings add to the already delicate pressure Abdoulaye feels. It becomes increasingly difficult for him to manage his emotions while staying focused on his daily tasks. Every time he sees Rebecca, he experiences a mix of hope and anxiety. His days become a whirlwind of emotions, caught between fleeting joy during their rare conversations and the constant fear of losing his job. As the days pass, Abdoulaye continues to juggle these conflicting feelings. Each night, his heart races as he thinks about Rebecca, and each day, he struggles to suppress his emotions, worried that any attempt to get closer might cost him his job. One morning, while cleaning the windows in Rebecca's office, she enters and catches him gazing at an old black and white photograph of a historic town. She smiles, a soft, friendly smile that melts Abdoulaye's heart. Acting on impulse, Rebecca strikes up a conversation. "Abdoulaye, you seem thoughtful this morning. Is everything all right?" The sincerity in her tone and the curiosity in her eyes make Abdoulaye hesitate before responding. He tries to maintain a professional demeanor, but his emotions are palpable. "Yes, Mademoiselle Rebecca, everything is fine. It's just that this photo reminds me of memories." Rebecca, intrigued, presses him to share more. "Memories of your childhood?" Feeling slightly uneasy, Abdoulaye nods. Sensing his discomfort, Rebecca offers to listen to his story as she prepares her coffee. She invites him to sit down for a moment. Abdoulaye, hesitant but moved by her kindness, agrees. This unexpected moment of connection gives Abdoulaye a glimmer of hope. Over the weeks, their exchanges become more frequent, though always cautious. Rebecca begins to see Abdoulaye as more than just an employee. She is touched by his simplicity, sincerity, and the way he speaks of his dreams and aspirations. Yet, she remains aware of the complexity of their situation. Abdoulaye, on the other hand, is torn between the happiness of these moments and the constant fear of repercussions. His colleagues continue to warn him, and the looming presence of Monsieur Jean-Pierre casts a shadow over every interaction he has with Rebecca. One evening, as Abdoulaye prepared to head home after a long day of work, he was lost in thoughts of Rebecca, as always. Just as he was gathering his belongings, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Abdoulaye, I'm sorry to bother you, but I really need your help with something." Startled, he turned around to see Rebecca standing there, visibly nervous but determined. His heart raced as he heard her say his name, spoken by the woman he so deeply admired. "Of course, Mademoiselle Rebecca," he replied, trying to hide his nervousness. "What can I do for you?" Rebecca seemed to hesitate for a moment, then took a deep breath before speaking. "I have an important meeting tomorrow morning, and I absolutely need to prepare some documents tonight, but there's a power outage at my place. I really need help printing them. Would you come to my place and help me prepare them?" Abdoulaye was taken aback. The idea of going to her home, stepping into her private world, filled him with both fear and joy. He knew it could create complications, but the thought of helping her and spending more time with her was irresistible. "Yes, of course," he finally said, trying to conceal his excitement. "I'd be happy to help." Rebecca smiled, relieved, and they set off together toward her apartment. The journey was quiet, punctuated by small talk. Inside, Abdoulaye was a whirlwind of emotions. Joy at being near her, but also anxiety about crossing an invisible line. When they arrived, Rebecca led him into her cozy, elegant apartment, a reflection of her personality. She guided him to her study, where papers were scattered everywhere. "This is where I spend my evenings working," she explained with a smile. "Sorry about the mess. I didn't have time to organize everything." Abdoulaye shook his head, a sincere smile on his lips. "It's perfect as it is," he said softly. "Let's get it all sorted out." They spent the next few hours working side by side. Rebecca was focused yet comfortable around him, and Abdoulaye felt honored to be in her presence. Yet every glance she gave him, every smile, deepened his feelings for her, even as he felt the weight of potential consequences. As they finally finished the task, Rebecca stretched and sighed with relief. "Thank you, Abdoulaye. I don't know what I would have done without you tonight." Abdoulaye smiled but couldn't shake a twinge of sadness. He knew that despite these moments of connection, a relationship between them seemed impossible. Still, he couldn't stop dreaming. Rebecca, noticing his pensive expression, stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You seem troubled. Is something wrong?" Abdoulaye hesitated, searching for the right words. He wanted to pour his heart out, but he knew it would only make things worse. "No, not at all," he finally said with a smile that failed to hide his melancholy. "Just a bit tired, that's all." Rebecca looked at him for a moment, as if sensing the unspoken words. Then she nodded, respecting his silence. "All right. In any case, thank you again, Abdoulaye. You've been a great help." They said their goodbyes, and Abdoulaye left the apartment with a mixture of happiness and sadness. The next morning, as the sun barely rose, Rebecca was already on her way to her meeting. Her mind was clouded, not just by the business matters at hand, but by thoughts of Abdoulaye. The previous evening had affected her more than she cared to admit. There was a kindness and sincerity in Abdoulaye that touched her deeply, beyond appearances and the social differences that separated them. Meanwhile, Abdoulaye, back at work, struggled to focus. He replayed every moment from the night before, every smile, every glance. Yet he knew their relationship was doomed. Social status, family expectations, everything seemed to stand in their way. A few days later, as Abdoulaye was going about his usual tasks, Monsieur Jean-Pierre arrived unexpectedly. He fixed Abdoulaye with a cold, piercing stare, making his intentions clear without a word. After a tense silence, the CEO finally spoke in a harsh tone. "Abdoulaye, I respect you as a dedicated employee, but let me be clear, what happened between you and my daughter the other night, it must not happen again. I forbid you from seeing her, and if you dare approach Rebecca again, I will have you fired without hesitation. Do I make myself clear? With trembling hands, Abdoulaye lowered his eyes, knowing that arguing would only make things worse. He nodded silently, his heart heavy. Monsieur Jean-Pierre turned on his heel and walked away without another word, leaving Abdoulaye alone, drowning in a sea of dark thoughts. The young man knew the CEO wasn't one to make empty threats. But how could he abandon the one person who had touched his soul? Determined to sever the connection between his daughter and Abdoulaye, Monsieur Jean-Pierre intensified his efforts. He hired private investigators to follow Rebecca wherever she went, ensuring she had no further contact with Abdoulaye. This authoritarian and intrusive decision added immense pressure on Rebecca, who began to feel like a prisoner in her own life. Caught between her father's control and her growing feelings for Abdoulaye, Rebecca wrestled with frustration and despair. She respected her father but couldn't ignore the connection she felt with Abdoulaye. The surveillance and restrictions weighed heavily on her, creating a rift between her and her father and leaving her with a growing sense of inner turmoil. Despite the precautions, Rebecca couldn't stop her thoughts from drifting to Abdoulaye. Every moment with him had left an indelible mark on her heart, and she struggled to find a way to resolve their difficult situation. Her father's extreme measures made her question the limits of parental protection and the personal sacrifices she was willing to make to be with Abdoulaye. Rebecca was now torn between her obligations to her father and her feelings for Abdoulaye. The constant surveillance and restrictions imposed by Monsieur Jean-Pierre weighed heavily on her shoulders, and each anxious glance from the private agents only amplified her discomfort. She felt like a prisoner in a life she no longer recognized. One evening, after an especially exhausting day, Rebecca found a letter slipped under her door. It was from Abdoulaye. With trembling hands, she opened it and began to read. Dear Rebecca, I don't know where to begin or how to find the right words. Since our last meeting, every moment apart from you has felt endless. Your father's face, his words, haunt me constantly. I can't stop thinking about you, about all we've shared, about what could be. I'm sorry for putting you through all this. The situation has become too complicated, and I know the best thing for both of us might be to step away, to leave behind everything that keeps us from freely living our love. I know it sounds extreme, but it's the only solution I can see to spare us further pain. I don't want you to feel obligated to follow me. But if, for even a moment, you feel that you're ready to leave everything behind to be with me, then I ask you to meet me. I've decided to leave the city, to go somewhere we can start over, far from constraints and prying eyes. I'll be at the station tonight at 9 p.m. If your heart tells you to join me, I'll be waiting for you there. If not, know that I'll understand your decision and will forever cherish the precious moments we shared. With all my love, Abdoulaye. Rebecca read the letter several times, her eyes brimming with tears. The idea of leaving her current life, of abandoning everything to follow Abdoulaye, felt both exhilarating and terrifying. But the love she felt for him was stronger than her fears and doubts. She spent the night reflecting, weighing the pros and cons, searching for signs of what the future might hold in her dreams. By dawn, a clear resolution had formed. She decided to leave everything she knew behind to join Abdoulaye. In the hours that followed, Rebecca hastily packed her belongings, leaving behind her obligations and responsibilities. She was careful to leave no trace that might reveal her plans. She was determined to follow her heart, no matter the sacrifices. At 8:45 p.m., Rebecca slipped out of her apartment, leaving a note for her father that briefly explained she needed time for herself without going into details. She made her way to the station, her emotions a mix of anxiety and excitement. At exactly 9 p.m., she arrived at the station, her heart pounding. Abdoulaye was there, waiting. When their eyes met, radiant smiles lit up both their faces. Rebecca walked toward him, enveloped by the feeling that a new life was beginning for them. They embraced tenderly, the promise of an uncertain but hopeful future filling their hearts. The train that would take them to a fresh start slowly pulled out of the station, carrying away the last remnants of their old lives. For Rebecca and Abdoulaye, a new chapter was beginning, one not dictated by imposed constraints but by their own desire for freedom and love. As the train moved forward, Rebecca and Abdoulaye sat side by side in a discreet compartment, shielded from the outside world by the trembling windows. The scenery passed by slowly, but their minds were focused on the future they would build together. Rebecca, seated by the window, watched the city lights fade behind her. In her hands, she held a small bag containing a few essential personal items. The rest of her life was left behind in an apartment she had once considered her fortress. She had decided to abandon everything: her possessions, her relationships, and most importantly, the expectations her father had placed upon her. All of it was now in the past. Abdoulaye, his gaze fixed on her, felt a mix of relief and worry. He had boarded the train with the hope of escaping the constraints that had governed his life, but he knew they now faced the reality of an uncertain future. Turning to Rebecca, he gently took her hand. "We have a long journey ahead of us, Rebecca," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You left everything behind to be with me. I can never thank you enough for that." Rebecca turned to him, her eyes filled with determination and tenderness. "I regret nothing, Abdoulaye. It's you who makes all of this worthwhile. We'll write our own story, far from the shadows of the past." The train kept moving, the tracks resonating like the heartbeat of a new beginning for the two lovers. They talked about their hopes and dreams, imagining a future filled with simplicity and happiness, far from the complications of the world they had left behind. As the train carried them farther from the city, their conversations grew deeper. Rebecca shared her fears and aspirations, while Abdoulaye spoke of his ambitions for a fresh start. They decided to settle in a small village Abdoulaye knew, a place where he had once dreamed of beginning a new life away from the intrigues of the city. Upon their arrival in the picturesque village, they were greeted by the tranquility of an unspoiled countryside. The stone houses, lush green fields, and serene atmosphere stood in stark contrast to the frantic pace of their former lives. They found a small house in need of renovation, where they began to build their new home. Rebecca discovered the joy of simplicity and self-sufficiency. She enthusiastically immersed herself in domestic tasks while starting to cultivate a small garden. Abdoulaye, on his part, began working on local projects and assisting the villagers, finding deep meaning in community and mutual support. The first few months were marked by challenges, moments of doubt, and exhaustion. Yet, every obstacle strengthened their bond and deepened their love. Evenings were often spent talking under the stars, reminiscing about their choices and reminding themselves of the reasons they had decided to leave everything behind. As months passed, their life in the village gradually became a harmonious reality. Rebecca found her place within the community, and Abdoulaye succeeded in completing several projects that brought optimism and vitality to the village. One summer evening, as they strolled through fields bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun, Abdoulaye took Rebecca's hand and stopped. "Do you remember everything we left behind?" he asked. Rebecca smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Yes, I remember. But I wouldn't change it for all the gold in the world. We've built something far more precious." They kissed gently, fully aware that their decision had been the right one. They had succeeded in leaving behind the chains of the past to embrace a future built on love and freedom. Their fresh start was now a reality, and each day brought new proof that, sometimes, leaving everything behind can be the first step toward genuine and lasting happiness. We hope this story has inspired you and given you something to reflect on regarding the choices we make in our lives and the sacrifices we are willing to embrace to follow our own path. Let us never forget that the hardest decisions are often the ones that open doors to the greatest joys.